Welcome back to A Bite from the Money Sandwich, where we provide practical and easy to understand tips and ideas on how to manage your money better, so as to let you retire with comfort and on your own terms. Whether you're just starting out in your career or already retired, what does retirement mean to you? And what do you want your retirement to look like? Today I speak to Shannon Nutter, who is a Principal Executive Consultant at Vanguard Australia. Shannon talks about Vanguard's latest report, How Australia Retires, which is a study exploring Australians' attitudes towards retirement and how they feel about this phase of life. Here are the key takeouts from the report and how responses vary depending on what stage of life you are already currently in. We also speak about the negative stigma when talking about money and how you just don't know what you just don't know. So starting a conversation with a friend or speaking to an expert is so important and can make such a positive impact to your financial situation. Well, welcome, Shannon, to the show.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Now, we have children of a similar age. I've got girls, you've got boys, and I'm always interested in asking a parent, especially someone who's in the investment field and superannuation field, how they educate their children and actually how their children respond to that. That I had parents who had no inkling around money, so I definitely work overtime with my own children. What's your views on educating children and what they have to go through in this new age?
Oh, it's an interesting question, and I think I have talked about money to my children for years, which I don't know what it's like here in Australia, but I know in the U.S. People don't always talk about money openly within families, and so it was something that I always actually wanted to talk to my children about, in terms of when they were getting even an early allowance for doing chores, how they were going to spend that, what they were going to save, were they going to give any of it away. And how to think about that. And now that they're a little bit older, I think they've really, whether they want to admit that they listened to it over the years or not, they've certainly adapted or adopted some of the things we've talked about in terms of, hey, look, when you're young, the key thing that you have over any other investor who's older is time. You've got the value of time. The more money you can put away early, the more it compounds and supports you later on. And we've always talked about living beneath their means. So no matter what they're earning in a job, think about how much they should actually be spending and how much they should be putting away. So both of my kids are actually pretty disciplined savers already.
Excellent.
They've had investment accounts at Vanguard for a number of years already. And so, I'm hopeful that they'll keep up those good habits over time. But it really is a habit. Once you start putting even a little bit of money away on a regular basis, hopefully over time that just increases and you just develop that consistency of investing, which will really support you later on.
Yeah, no, couldn't agree more. One of the slides we do workshops and workshops for 20, 30 and 40-year-olds. And we actually just say, look, if you were investing $5,000 a year from your 40s, how much you'll have at 60, how much you will have if you started in your 30s, or even how much you would have if you started in your 20s. And it basically, one was 400,000 if you're in your 40s, and it goes up to about 3 million if you could start in your 20s. It's quite ridiculous, but showing them in practical terms how the effect of compound interest with time, it's just astounding.
It is so powerful.
And okay, so I know you're in Australia at the moment, even though the US is home, and you're here in a part two with Vanguard and launching this new retirement study. It's great, and it's also with that, Vanguard is also, even though they've been around for, as long as I can remember, at least 30, 40 years, and here in Australia, and have long had very good returns and from an investment point of view, but now you've actually got your own product. But I was really interested in this actual study, this research you did on Australia. And I was just curious, why was this thought of, something that was needed, or you found, why did you start on this project?
Sure. So happy to chat about that. I mean, I think Vanguard has a long history of doing research and analysis with the market and with our own clients and their data to better understand what's happening with consumers, how do they think, and what are the opportunities and challenges that we can identify that enable us to build better products and services, right, for those folks. So I think we do that globally, and certainly for Australia, as we were looking at launching Vanguard Super, which we did last year, right, we really wanted to take a closer look at retirement as a whole. Such an important part of life. And it's different from other aspects of our lives in that we really need to prepare for it through our savings, at least for decades, right? And there aren't many
Yes.
other aspects of our lives that require that. So, that focus on improving retirement outcomes for investors, long been a focus of Vanguard. But we didn't have any real proprietary research, if you will, in Australia about how retirees or how working age Australians were thinking about retirement. And so that's why we did this survey, over 1,800 working age and retired Australians from all around the country, not focused on Vanguard clients at all. And
Right.
we really wanted to understand what they were thinking about, how they're thinking about that path to retirement, how they're thinking about their expectations versus what is the reality for folks already in retirement. How confident are they feeling, right? All sorts of information like that so that we could better assess their needs.
Yeah, and one of the things you said over there is about the confidence, and we'll come to that because that was a fascinating part for me. But going back to the age range that you did, this is what I found also very fascinating was that you looked at people from a young age, what they're expected. Because, I know from my own experience being in super for so long, if I talk to a lot of 80-year-old millennials or Gen Xers and their eyes just glaze over. And one of the things you've found in your research is that it's not the traditional, I have one job, I have one career, and when I hit 65, I'm going to stop work. It's very different thinking now, or maybe I have time off work. So please, I'd love to know a bit more about that.
Yeah, I think that's a really fascinating aspect of the study that you just hit on, is this idea of, is the idea of career and retirement going to stay the same over time? This idea of, I get out of university, I start working, and then when I'm 65 or 67, I retire and then go live my life of leisure. Is that how folks who aren't retired thinking about their life? And it turns out they're not, right? There are a lot of working age Australians who are actually saying, 2 in 5, in fact, who are saying, I actually think I'm going to take one or more extended breaks during my life. And maybe that includes parental leave, but maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's extended travel, maybe it's extended study. And so I think that that's really interesting. It will be fascinating to watch what that means for their life and for their retirement. Great to take the break, but how do you think about the impact that may have on your retirement in the future? And so therefore, how do you plan differently?
Yes, and I think financial security, which is, if you talk to any person, they're talking about their finances, that's always in their top three is, how soon they can have financial security traditionally. And I love talking about like 20th century thinking to 21st century thinking. 20th century thinking, we thought financial security was when you hit 65, I'll be retired, I will have my house paid off, 2 or 3 things, whereas now very much financial security. Well, why do I need to wait till I'm 65 to have financial security? I'd like to have it earlier, or I'd like to, as you said, have time off. And I do actually think that's a far healthier way of thinking about it. Once you do get into your 50s and 60s, and unfortunately, you do have friends that either have passed away or aren't as well as they used to be. And you think, it was always, well, once that's when I'll travel the world. That's when I'll go around the trip around Australia. And you sort of think, well, no, I do think it is a far healthier way as long as you can afford it, which is the critical part, as long as you can afford it to have these breaks. And it's not just once you get to an age 65, because their eyes just glaze over if you talk about the age 65 nowadays.
Well, and I think the notion too that I get to be 65 or 67 and I completely stop working
Yes.
isn't necessarily what folks are thinking either. We saw that 1 in 3 working age Australians say that I plan to do some form of work in quote retirement. Now, there may be some of those people who aren't sure they can afford the kind of retirement they want, and so they feel they need to keep working. But no doubt there are members of that group as well who are just saying, I don't actually want to stop working. Maybe I want to do something different than my main career. Maybe I want to start a small
Yes.
business. But hey, for me mentally, being engaged, being involved, continuing to be goal oriented or whatever might be motivating that person, is important. And you noted mental health, right? I mean, that's
Mm.
key as well there too.
Yeah, and exactly. When they're at the age of 65, a lot of times my clients, just exactly as you said, they want to work. They want to work because they want to rather than because they have to. So financially, if
Mhm.
they're in a good position and they can then either slow down, because if they really enjoy what they're doing, why shouldn't they keep doing it? But also, we're seeing, and it's a term I only heard a few years ago, but the whole side hustle. But I'm seeing far more people in their 50s and 60s going into these side hustles, some other type of work or part-time work or a small business on the side just to keep their brain active. And there is one of the things when we talk about people who retire and the factors you need to take into account, and financials, probably of the 6 of them that I have. To me, being part of a community is really important, and the second one is mental
Mm,
challenge. And if you don't have your brain being active, it's a real worry, concern for if you want to live a long life at this next stage of life. And people are living into their 80s and 90s. You want to be well enough to enjoy it. And yeah, and if you want to keep on working, you should absolutely be able to.
completely agree.
One of the other things, though, that is why education and getting your money working harder for you, and this is, what Vanguard, I know, have been working on in a lot of their research, the difference between getting a 4% return in retirement to a 6% or an 8% return, if you're going to live another 20 or 30 years, is so important. And it is one of the things is we are living longer. I think people used to say, well, I'm going to retire at 65. I'll probably be around another 5, 10 years. My money doesn't have to last that long. But my real big concern is that, yes, the biggest risk is not where your money is invested, but that you could outlive your money. And a lot of
Mm.
your research is backing that up.
Yeah, so I think, that's a question that's on a lot of people's minds in terms of, well, how much money am I going to need to retire, right? And life
Mm.
expectancy certainly plays a role in that. And there are also a number of other factors: where you live, how you want to live, what amount of debt you're going into retirement with, obviously a host of considerations. And I think the key is that there's no one answer for everyone, right? Unfortunately,
Mm.
it's always it depends.
Yes.
Depends on a lot of things. But what is consistent for everyone is that preparation and planning are the keys to retirement confidence. Those
Mm.
who have planned well, whether that's on their own or with an advisor, are 6 times more confident than those without a plan. And that is a dramatic difference
Mm.
between those two groups. So, if you think about sitting down and just coming up with some basics, whether that's a budget, whether that's thinking about how much additional you want to be putting into super or other investments, and then taking some action towards those things, right? I think positive actions that improve your outcomes breed more positive actions. You're more
Right.
likely to continue down that positive path. And, it all starts with good planning.
Yeah, and I like that. That's one of your the chapters in your research is about having a plan, but it also, you don't. While if you can afford having to have a full comprehensive financial plan is great, and actually having an advisor, someone who can keep you accountable and on track, um, but just having some type of plan is just
Mm,
important.
exactly.
Yeah. So one of the things is because when you sort of also have a plan, I remember reading about in your research that because people just don't know what they don't know. People don't know the fees they're charging or what even return or where their money is invested, you found.
Oh, exactly. Unfortunately, too many people are just completely unengaged with their financial lives, I'll say.
Mm.
Maybe they're most in tune with their credit card debt, I would guess, or their or their
Yes.
bank statement, but many people have just not been engaged with their super. 1 in 2 don't know the fees they're paying. 1 in 4 don't even know their balance.
Uh,
Um, and about half of the folks we interviewed, hadn't made any contact with their superannuation in the last 12 months. So supers can do a great job of answering some basic questions, but it would benefit everyone just to go in and learn some basics about what they're paying, what they're invested in, even what their options are in terms of maximizing their super if they have enough discretionary income to do that. So, when we think about super, we certainly think about how we could come in and help reshape the industry for the benefit of all Australians. And to that end, we've been really focused on making sure our fees were very transparent,
mhm.
so that no one had to guess what the fees were. And so we've looked to do that, and certainly are looking to make the experience more engaging, because I do think the industry has made it difficult, and financial services globally, right, I think has always been a little bit difficult. We use a lot of jargon. Experiences haven't always been easy for people. And it can be intimidating because a lot of what you hear talked about in the world of finance sounds complex.
Mm.
And so it can be really intimidating for folks to think, oh my gosh, I've got to be a lot smarter in order to do this right, versus thinking about some of those basics of saving enough, being well diversified, making sure you have a low cost product that's delivering good returns.
Yeah, and exactly. And well, we're wanting definitely not to make this all about make this about Vanguard. It is just important that Vanguard has just been the basis of so much research, helping people invest in Australia. And having your own product is great, but just sort of from any product, if anyone who has their
Mhm.
own super fund, and definitely not so saying, you should look and see if there's someone better and all that. But what you should be doing, exactly what you've just said, you should know how much your fees are. And if it's really difficult, or you found going onto the website, you just can't find stuff, you either ask the questions or you find a better product. But that's in anything in life.
Oh, absolutely.
But one of the things that I always find is that people just don't know where the money is invested. And to me, when
Mhm.
we were talking before about getting your money working harder, the fact of compounding interest, and as you said, time, and even people say, "Oh, I'm 60. What's that?" I said, "You could have another 30 years. The difference in your account balance could triple based on 30 years if it's invested rightly." And people just don't realize. I talk to a lot of 30 and 40-year-olds and saying, "Did you realize your super fund has 20% of your investment in cash? You've got 20 years before retirement, and how many years after that?
Mhm.
Why would you ever need cash, which is a short-term investment? You should be getting your money working harder for you." So these are the sort of things you should be looking at your super fund. And if it's not doing what you think it should be doing, you should be looking around. And there's plenty of ways of doing that. One of the other things I really liked is also people's expectations of retirement differ greatly from reality. That's a really interesting section, because people do have these preconceived ideas, and yet reality can be very, very different.
Oh yeah, and I think it's natural as well. What we saw is that expectation of folks who aren't yet retired differed from those who are already in retirement,
Yes.
right?
Okay.
Perhaps not surprisingly.
Yeah.
Um, and what we see of the working age Australians is about 50% of them expect to have incomes in retirement that are significantly higher than those that the older generations already have in retirement. Now, that could be a level of idealism, it could be an optimistic view, or it could be a real aspiration that they're going to strive to achieve. I think time will tell in terms of how their expectations shift. But what we saw is that those who are not yet retired, those who are still working, would like to have an average income of about 99,000 per year.
Okay.
Those who are already retired say they've got about 68,000. Now, some of that, could be I just have different spending patterns when I'm retired versus when I'm working. My tax structures might be different. So I think that that's going to be an interesting one to watch. Of do the working age Australians, if they do have this desire to have a higher income, do they plan for it? Do they build towards that? Or is their expectation going to change over time?
Mm. And you must also find that interesting in that, especially now, you're doing this work for and this research on Australia, and we have our superannuation, the superannuation guarantee, which is a forced
Mm,
savings, disciplined savings, I suppose, where the employer is paying in, and people don't realize actually how lucky they are compared to other
mm.
countries, compared to the 401ks in America, or the where you've got to do it yourself in New Zealand. If you do some, the government will pay as well. But having this, Australians are going to be far better off in retirement than a lot of other countries.
Oh, absolutely agree. You have a great system here in that it, essentially mandates that everyone save a pretty healthy percentage. And in other countries, the US as an example, we have to design systems differently to get folks engaged because you want them to increase their savings from lower rates
Mm,
to those higher rates, to generally we say 12 to 15% of your income, or more, depending on your level of affluence. And that can be a challenge. Now, I think on the plus side is that in those countries where you have less savings mandated, we have developed really great ways to engage people and get
yes.
them to take action for their retirement. And I think here in Australia, we have the opposite challenge where you've got high mandated rates, but it's been a struggle over time. People haven't had to get folks engaged to save more. So both sides can learn from each other.
Yeah, no, totally agree. And you actually said at the very beginning, uh, and I think with people in the States, there is absolutely far more interest, and maybe it's because of these sort of things where you've got to do it for yourself to actually be self-motivated and actually get your finances in order. Whereas in Australia, and not just for retirement, just in savings in general, we had research recently that said a 1 in 3 are spending more than they earn, which is,
Mm,
that's just not sustainable. But people don't want to talk about money, and that's part of
mm.
why this podcast and the book and all that became, because people need to get better about talking about money. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons we can learn from the States, is that people are willing to talk about money, and we just don't do that here. And you must find that sort of a bit unusual, or a bit even frustrating when you want to talk about this.
Oh, it's interesting. Well, we've got to make it less taboo,
Yes.
regardless of where we are, right?
Yeah, we do. And one of the things is, I always find when you actually talk to someone, when you do anything in life, whether you, and I think this is also a 20th century, 21st century thing, where you did a lot of things on your own and you could afford to do things on your own. But now I think people realize that you had a coach when you were a young child with sports. But once you got to a certain age, well, no, yeah, you do things on yourself. Whereas I think people are now 21st century are realizing they need help.
Mm,
There are people out there. There's so many consultants, there's life coaches, there's money coaches, there's sports coaches, there's business coaches, plenty of mentors. In any good business setting, people are providing mentors to younger staff. That's something that I think you're seeing in your research, that having the value of someone in your life helping you with all this is so important.
Oh, I completely agree. And I think that that can happen in a lot of different ways. But as I had noted before, right, folks that have a plan, 6 times more confident in their
Mm,
retirement than those who don't have a plan. And so, how do you develop a plan? How do you think about your budgeting? How do you prioritize savings? How do you learn to spend less than you earn? How do you learn to take some money maybe you were spending and turn that into savings? And that can be with a coach, a professional advisor in this case. Maybe that's ongoing. Maybe you have a one-off engagement, and maybe that's recurring annually, et cetera. Or maybe you join an investing group. Maybe you
mm,
start pulling together some neighbors or whatever that might be. Maybe it's online, maybe it's offline. I think there are a lot of ways to develop that sort of group that helps hold you accountable. If I think about the analogy of a gym, right? Some people need a
Yes.
personal trainer.
Yes.
Some people, that's the only way they're going to get motivated. It's the only way they're going to hold themselves accountable. Other folks can just, oh no, I joined the gym. And so just by joining the gym and paying the fee, that's enough to keep me motivated. And now I'll just go to the gym. And some people don't need any of that. They can just, self-motivate and completely do all the things they need to do to stay healthy on their own without the gym or the trainer. So I think with money, we're no different, right? People fall into all of those groups. And I think it's at least acknowledging, what group am I in? And do I
Mm.
need help? And it's okay if I need help in this space, because guess what? I might be an expert at something else, but I'm not an expert at money or how to invest. And so why don't I go get help from an expert? And again, that can come in all sorts of forms, but I think that's part of talking about it, right? We just have to
Mm.
admit that maybe I'm not good at this, and that's okay. Let me go get some help.
Yeah, and it's okay to go get some help in anything. And one of the things, I did see this great piece of research out of the States where it said if you actually wanted to reach your goal, and it gave you the percentages of chance, yes, if you have a plan, you've got a 20% chance, and so on and so on. But the only way around 95% is if you actually have a coach with that
Mm.
plan. And it's true, because I'm one of those people. I have joined a few gyms over the years, and those memberships have just lapsed. The only time it ever did any good was if I actually then went and actually had the effort of getting a personal trainer. Because sometimes, if it's, as you said, that analogy of having your own financial gym buddy that's going to keep you accountable, whether it's a coach or just a friend, and having that for money is so good. And I actually really, one of the things you sort of said there, having a little investment group where you as a group keep you accountable, I think that's a great idea. And I just go straight to that. One of the really terrible stats there's here in Australia is that for homelessness, the research is coming out that the second fastest group of homeless is single women in their 50s.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just something that's just, whether that's divorce or however that's happened, it's just something where, and yet women are much better than men, are happy to form these little groups. And I just think that would be a terrific way. Keep
Mm.
yourselves accountable. Once every 6 months, whether it's your book club, you actually talk about money. And I think women are far better at talking about these things than men are. We bottle these things up. It's ridiculous. Great to hear millennials and Gen Xers are much better than us baby boomers. But I think this is the sort of things we can do to try and keep it affordable, because unfortunately financial advice is becoming an expensive cost in people's lives.
Yeah, I like the term you use, like a gym buddy, right?
Mm.
Somebody that you're saying, whether you're meeting them at the gym or whether you're just saying, yep, I worked out the 4 times this week that I told you I was going to work out, and
Mm.
somebody holding you accountable. And you can do exactly the same thing with money, right?
Yep.
I was trying to save whatever the number is. I was going to try to save another $50 a week, and guess what? Tick, I've done that. Great
Mm.
job. Okay, so now what are we doing next, right? And those kinds of things, even though they're not commonly talked about, right? They could be if we just started to open that dialogue.
Yeah, and I think, having the research that you've provided, and actually what I also should commend you on, you've got really good practical examples in there. And so people can sort of say, yep, I relate to that person. That person's in a similar situation to me, or I want to be like that person. And I always find if you've got examples like that, so having this type of research, having those sort of practical examples in there, that helps the conversation. And that's all we really want people to do, start talking about money, start talking about their retirement. Because as you said at the very top of the program, the one thing you don't have that the younger generation do is time.
Exactly.
Now, it's been actually wonderful to talk to you, and I love talking about any of this, and I love that Vanguard have made the effort to do all this. But just from one of the things we always like to finish up our podcast on is to ask a final question of our guest. And it's what's the best piece of advice you've ever received? It can be financial, could be life, but something that you've heard that that's resonated with you or stuck with you over the years.
That's a great question. I would say something that was told to me early in my career that really has stuck with me all these years, was this. Someone had said to me, "You don't get what you don't ask for."
Right.
And it is simple enough. You still might not get it.
Mm.
You might get told no, but you're definitely gonna get told yes more if you at least speak up and ask for what you want. And so, yeah, that's probably the best piece I've ever gotten.
No, and that's something I have heard before, but yeah, no, it's one of those pieces of advice that you sort of think, well, it just seems so obvious, but it just very few people ask the question, and if you get no, you're in no worse position. But it absolutely makes sense, and I do think that's something Australians can definitely learn far more from the States about the confidence of actually getting out there and actually just asking the question sometimes. Shannon, just wonderful that you've been a guest on our show. It's the Vanguard research is brilliant, but just the way you've been able to explain it in everyday terms, everyday sense, has just been wonderful. So thank you very much for being on the show.
Oh, thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to know more about Shannon Nutter and Vanguard, visit vanguard.com.au. Or feel free to email me on admin@themoneysandwich.com or visit our website, themoneysandwich.com, if you have any questions or would like to learn more. Want more practical, easy to understand tips and action lists to help with your money stuff? The latest version of my book, The Money Sandwich, is now available to order on Booktopia and Amazon, as well as available at all popular bookstores. Everyone deserves to retire comfortably and on their own terms. Make this the year you take action. As with every podcast, this information is not advice, as not personalised to your own situation. And past performance is never guaranteed for the future. What we are trying to do here is to provide tips, coaching and education to help improve your money knowledge, which we believe can only be a good thing. See you next time when we take another bite from The Money Sandwich.